I would like to make you all aware that this meeting is being live streamed by the Council's YouTube channel. Please ensure that any mobile phones are switched to silent. So welcome to those who are watching at home. I would also like to outline some housekeeping arrangements. If you wish to speak, please do so to myself. To enable your microphone, please press the middle button that will turn green, and the microphone will light up red at the top to indicate that this has happened. Please press the middle button when you have finished speaking, as it is particularly important that all members use their microphone so that the audio can be picked up through the live stream. In the event of a fire alarm sounding in the middle of a meeting, please stand and follow the meeting administrator to the meeting evacuation point outside of the building. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Clark, Dew, Niche and Slade.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes for the last meeting. Do we all agree these minutes are a correct record of the meeting from our last meeting? So we'll move on to item 2, which is members' interests. Are there any members that would like to declare an interest in relation to any items on the agenda this evening? Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in item 3C, in that I'm a member of the Huntingdon Town Council, although I took no part in the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Chair, the same would apply to myself.
Any other? Fantastic. So we'll move on to item 3A, which is our first application that is in Chesterton, and that will be presented to us by our planning officer, Kevin Simpson.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So yes, this is item 3A, which is pages 9 to 28 of the reports pack, relates to a change of use of land to residential curtilage and the erection of a detached self-build residential annex at land north of Abbott's House, Priory Gardens, Chesterton.
You start your speech again.
Yeah, just so
Councillor Wakeford. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so this is agenda item 3A, which is pages 9 to 28 of the reports pack, and relates to the proposed change of use of land to residential curtilage and the erection of a detached self-build residential annex at land north of Abbott's House, Priory Gardens, Chesterton. It's presented to Development Management Committee as the officer's recommendation of approval differs from that of the Parish Council, with their objections detailed at part 5.1 of the officer report you will have seen. It's worth noting that item 3B on the agenda this evening, which will be presented by my colleague, relates to the same land as this application, but is for a different proposal. The two are separate, but just came in as separate planning applications. You may have seen also in the late representations pack that during the lifetime of the application, a tree protection plan was provided. So originally we were going to condition a tree protection plan, but they've submitted one and our arboricultural officer has checked it, confirmed it's okay. So in the event that this is approved this evening, we just need to condition compliance with the tree protection plan. Okay, I'll just go through the presentation. So that shows the location of the site. You can see there, this area of land here that you will see in a second was related to Abbott's House, and a dwelling was approved on that site in 2018 and is under construction. Sorry, I'm just having a problem with the cursor there. Apologies, yeah. So that was the former tennis court associated with Abbott's House, and this is the section of land in question to the rear of it. You can see the constraints related surrounding the site, but none actually within it. Okay, and that's an aerial view of the site. Again, you'll note that this is pre-development of the house with the tennis court related to Abbott's house still visible. And we're referring to the area of land that you see beyond the tennis court where the cursor is at present. Okay, so this shows the location plan that's been submitted as part of this application. So you can see the land edged in red, the house that's been developed, and the land to the north edged in blue, which is also under the ownership of the applicant. And that's the location plan that was submitted under the 2018 application for the dwelling. So you can see that the red line was quite tight to the north of the house. It didn't extend that far to the north, and there's also a section of land to the east that wasn't included. And those are the two plans adjacent to each other, so you can compare. So you can see which this proposal on the right-hand side wishes to extend the land into residential curtilage in comparison was what was permitted under the 2018 application. So I'm just trying to move on to the next slide. Apologies, I just seem to be having some technical issues with this. Okay, sorry about that. I think we're back up and running. So this is the proposed site plan. So that shows the dwelling in place and the annex to the northeast of the dwelling. So you can see there's about a 20-metre separation between the two. And that shows the proposed floor plan. So you can see it is very much a self-contained annex, shared living, kitchen, dining area, one bedroom and a bathroom area. And the elevations, so you can see the scale of it in relation to the site you've seen and the dwelling. These are some photographs of the site. So that's a general view looking northeast, and you can see the glass dome structure in the background of that picture, which is the subject of the next application, item 3B. And the proposed annex would be linear to that, to the left-hand side of where you see in that picture. That's a wider view of the site, so you can see the hedgerows and growth separating the section of land to the wider countryside and land owned by the applicant to the north. And then that's a wider view northwest, so you can see the dwelling under construction there. So the recommendation is to support the application with conditions relating to time limit for implementation, accordance with the approved plans, the compliance with the materials stated, a condition to secure it as ancillary use to the main dwelling, so it can never be used as a separate unit of accommodation, the removal of permitted development rights relating to boundary treatments and additional ancillary buildings in relation to the change of use of land, a condition to secure boundary treatments prior to any installation, securing a lighting scheme prior to any lighting being installed, and tree protection plan compliance as I detailed at the beginning of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For this particular application, we do not have any speakers. So we will move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer. So are there any questions of clarification for our planning officer? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just explain a little bit more about ancillary use? What does that mean in practice, please?
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. So yes, ancillary, it means it's parasitical to the main house, so it's reliant on it for some functions. So for example, this shares the same access, amenity space. It wouldn't have separate refuse bins or parking associated with it. So although it is somewhere where somebody could live, you would expect them to be reliant on the main house for things like laundry, sharing meals, etc. It wouldn't be their permanent place of residence. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of clarification? There's no other questions, so we will move on to the discussion. Who would like to start our discussion on this particular application? Councillor Sanderson.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kevin, for comprehensive report and presentation as always. I think this one is probably pretty straightforward. I think paragraph 7.12, middle of that paragraph, says the proposed building would be small in scale, single story only, of a scale proportionate to the main dwelling and surroundings. So for me, that is a big argument in favour of this application. And I think it's been pretty thorough in the presentation as well. So I won't propose anything at this point, but I think my view would be that we should approve this application at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I actually went and had a look at the site earlier today, and I really cannot see any real reasons for objection to this at all. So I'm very happy to propose it if anybody wants to second it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't sure if Councillor Sanderson had got a second in, but otherwise I'm happy to. I can go with Councillor Sanderson and Councillor McAdam. It looks fairly straightforward. It's disappointing we haven't got the contra view to ask questions of this evening, even though it's been prompted here by the parish council. But from what the officers have set out, what's in the report, I'm very happy to support it. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to contribute? Otherwise, we'll move on to the vote. So we've had a proposal of acceptance to approve this particular application from Councillor McAdam, which has been seconded by Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Therefore, that has been approved. We will move on to our next item on the agenda, which again is an application in Chesterton, and this will be presented to us by our planning officer, Charlotte Dew. And we'll just give her a few moments to get settled.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. This is agenda item 3B and pages 29 to 48 of the reports pack. This is an application to extend the residential curtilage by changing the use of the former agricultural land and retrospective planning permission for a greenhouse dome. As members have granted permission for agenda item 3A, the change of use to residential curtilage, this application is now for retrospective planning permission for the greenhouse dome. The application has been brought before Development Management Committee as the officer's recommendation for approval is contrary to Parish Council's recommendation for refusal. The parish's objection to the application is detailed in section 5.1 of the officer's report. The site is shown on this map. Officers note the plan on page 44 of the reports pack does not accord with the site location plan on page 45. The plan on page 44 has been amended in the late representations report. In terms of constraints, the site is located northeast of 3 listed buildings, including a grade 1 listed church. The site is located in flood zone 1 and at lowest risk of flooding. However, the brook which runs along the eastern boundary of the site is at some risk from surface water flooding. Officers acknowledge representations raised in regard to the presence of great crested newts. In this instance, the dome structure is already in position and would not result in harm should any newts or protected species be present on site. This is an aerial view of the site. The site is outlined in yellow. As mentioned in agenda item 3A, the aerial imagery does not show the permitted dwelling. On this slide, you can see a comparison between the approved location plan, the permitted dwelling in 2019, and the location plan for this application. As you can see, it has been extended slightly. On this slide, you can see the location and block plan of the extended residential curtilage and greenhouse dome. Officers acknowledge the parish's concerns relating to the siting of the greenhouse dome. However, the character and appearance of the site has changed over time and it no longer functions or it visually appears to be agricultural land. It is also noted third parties raise concerns in regard to overlooking. However, officers consider that due to the separation distance from adjacent neighbours and landscape screening on site boundaries, the greenhouse would not result in any detrimental overbearing, overshadowing or overlooking impacts. On this slide, you can see the floor plan and elevations of the greenhouse dome. The parish raised concerns regarding the use of the dome and whether its shape would, whether due to its shape it would be used for growing plants or whether it would be more likely to be used as a summer house. However, how the applicant chooses to use the building for its incidental domestic purposes is not relevant to the consideration of this application. Whilst the concerns of the parish in this respect have been considered, officers consider the design and mass of the dome structure to be acceptable. This is a view from within the site looking towards the permitted dwelling and the open countryside. This is a view from within the site towards the formal woodland and formal garden and woodland, sorry. This is a view from within the site looking towards the greenhouse dome. Apologies. The officer's recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions outlined in section 8 of the report. The removal of the permitted development rights Class E buildings within the curtilage is recommended to be imposed to prevent any large coverage of buildings on the site, which may be at odds with the open and spacious rural character of the site and surroundings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. For this particular application, we have no speakers, so we will move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer. Are there any questions of clarification for our planning officer? There are no questions, so we will move on to the discussion. Who would like to start the discussion? Thank you, Councillor Brereton.
Thank you, Chair. It's unfortunate again we haven't got parish council to comment on this. I can't see a problem with it, so I'm minded to approve it. Thank you.
Are there any other people that would like to speak? Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see anything, to sort of contrary to the officer's recommendation, so I'm more than happy to propose.
Thank you. And you're happy to second that? Okay. Are there any other councillors that wish to contribute to the discussion on this particular application? No other speakers, so we will move on to the vote. We've had a recommendation of approval by Councillor Corney and seconded by Councillor Brereton. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Therefore, this application has been approved.
Consider potential interest.
Right, we're just going to halt the meeting just for a second.
Don't think.
Okay, we will continue with item 3C on the 3C on the agenda. Councillor Wakeford, do you have a declaration?
Thank you. I have to be worth it now. Missed your interest item at the start, so just flag I'm the ward member, but in view of conversations I've been looped into in my executive capacity as well for sake of appearances and probity of the process. While I haven't reached a predetermined view, I'm going to declare interest and step out on this one anyway. So I'll rejoin you next.
Thank you very much. So item 3C on the agenda is an application in Huntingdon, which our planning officer, Lewis Tomlinson, will present to us.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the application is 16 Latham Road, Huntingdon, and it seeks plan permission for the retrospective conversion of existing warehouse into ancillary meat packing facility and associated works. So in front of you, you've got the site location plan. So you've got the site in red and other land in the same ownership under same control in blue. So the site is located within the established employment area. So that's policy LP 18 of the adopted local plan, Stuckley Meadows Industrial Estate, and is also within the Huntingdon Neighbourhood Plan catchment area. So the plan in front of you, you can see the little yellow star. So that's the site we're looking at. And you can just see you've got Stuckley Meadows Industrial Estate, Ermine Business Park to the left, and then St. Peter's Road Industrial Estate to the right. Again, this is just an aerial image, just showing the site. So you can see the red star this time. And it's just worth at this point, just while we're on the aerial, to just point out Huntingdon Business Centre, which is the property immediately to the south of the site. So you can just see there with the black arrow. I'll just run through some photos. So this is from the front of the site. This is to the right-hand side. So you've got blue containers. Side of the building, green container. This is taken from the south of the site. So this is looking at Huntingdon Business Centre on your left. That's the big building you can see. And on the right-hand side in the background is the application site. These are the external chillers, and we'll come on to this later. Just on the left-hand side of that photo, you can see a staircase. That's on Huntingdon Business Centre. So this is looking at Huntingdon Business Centre's elevation that faces onto the site. So you've got 2 ground floor windows. You've also got a first floor window there. Just on the right-hand side, you can see the chillers. Again, this is looking from it's literally the opposite way, looking towards Huntingdon Business Centre on your right, chillers straight ahead. One last photo, we got Huntingdon Business Centre on your left, and this was previously an amenity area, but it's also used as a fire evacuation route. So the application site is just off into the left at the background. So this application seeks approval for the conversion of existing warehouse into ancillary meat packing facility and associated works. This application is retrospective, with works being completed in November 2019. The Hilton Foods production facility occupies several units within the Stuckley Meadows Industrial Estate. The planning statement submitted with the application states that as Hilton have developed their business, ancillary equipment, welfare facilities, mechanical and electrical plant and storage facilities have been added around the building. The company operates on the site as a meat food processor. The interior of the building has been converted over time from commercial warehouse to meat packaging, with associated plant located at the rear of the building in order to maintain strict temperature controls in the building. The alterations to the building are as follows: addition of a fire escape on the south rear elevation and associated plant and controls mounted on a 40-foot container with a bank of 10 condensed units with 20 individual fans operating in pairs, which is what we just saw the photos, which is immediately adjacent to Huntingdon Business Centre. An additional acoustic enclosure raised off the ground above the existing container to a finishing height of 8.6 metres is proposed to be constructed around the existing plant, consisting of acoustic panels to match the existing Goosewing grey cladding. On the west elevation is the addition of the 40-foot storage container, which was painted green. So we saw that photo, which was to the side of the building. And on the north, which is the front elevation, you've got a single-storey grey porter cabin used as a canteen and rest facility for production staff, and 2 mechanical and electrical 40-foot containers. They were the blue ones we saw. So this application is referred to DMC in accordance with the scheme of delegation, as the officer recommendation of approval is contrary to that of the Town Council. Huntingdon Town Council have objected on grounds of loss of amenity to neighbouring properties. This objection is based around the noise impact of the external chillers installed on the south elevation of the building adjacent to Huntingdon Business Centre. I'll just run through the plans. So you've got the ground floor plan and first floor plan in front of you. Again, just to note, at the bottom of those plans, you can see the external chiller units, but you can just see the general layout of the buildings. This is the north elevation, so that's the front elevation. This is the west elevation, so that's where the green container was, for context. But you can also just see what's happening on the south elevation adjacent to Huntingdon Business Centre. And this is the south elevation, so you can see the chillers there. So you've got original elevation at the top, you've got the current condition in the middle, and the proposed situation at the bottom. So officers also note the extensive objections received from Huntingdon Business Centre, which has been provided by their own planning consultant and acoustic consultant. Environmental Health has reviewed all the submitted information from the applicant and has also considered the objections provided by Huntingdon Business Centre. The full detailed assessment of the potential noise impact is set out in the report, alongside other material planning considerations. Claire Braybook from Environmental Health is here tonight to answer questions that members may have. So just to summarise the report, but like I said, it's the detailed assessments within the report itself. So in line with guidance, the target internal sound levels are therefore likely to be met when the windows are closed. However, the guideline sound levels may be breached when windows are open. There is a balance between the competing demands of closed windows to mitigate external noise into offices and of windows to provide that reasonable ventilation and thermal conditions. The points that have been considered in this case are the location and the surrounding land use. So that's the industrial park and an established employment area, as well as the direction of the most impacted windows, so located in the northern elevation, therefore unlikely to have significant solar gains. Availability of windows on quieter elevations, overall sensitivity of the receptor, and the expectation of being able to open windows and meet internal guidelines. So it's not considered unreasonable in an industrial setting to have periods where workers are exposed to higher levels of noise, so that's above the recommended guidelines. If they wish to have windows open to prevent overheating, there should be a reasonable expectation of some noise in this particular location. Based on the information provided, the Council's Environmental Health team therefore concluded that there's insufficient grounds for refusal, planning permission in this instance. The predicted sound levels from the plant, once mitigated via suitably worded conditions, are likely to be acceptable and should not give rise to significant adverse impacts on health and quality of life in the workplace. And therefore the officer recommendation is approval, subject to the following conditions. You've got approved plans because it's retrospective, so you haven't got any time consent on it. You've got materials, noise mitigation strategy, maintenance scheme, acoustic attenuation measures compliance, and removal of permitted development rights. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers for this particular application. Our first speaker is Councillor David Cole from Huntingdon Town Council. Welcome, and you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee.
Hello, thank you. Can I just start by saying we had a miscommunication and sent the wrong thing over to the planning team. Sorry for the extra work. That was my bad. So thank you for your forbearance. This comes down to something pretty simple. How much negative impact can a development have on a neighbouring property? The applicants put in an extension for which they now seek retrospective approval. That extension is allowed to the extent that the neighbouring property, a business centre, can't let out some of its units, which it could before. Noise is obviously something that has to be taken into account in making planning decisions. So LP 14, clause C, says that predicted adverse noise impacts, including internal, external levels, time, duration, and character, will be acceptable. The reasoning for that is to ensure that new development does not have an adverse impact on the amenity of existing properties, and that adequate levels of amenity will be enjoyed by future occupiers of the proposed development. That's further supported by the Huntingdonshire Design Guide supplementary planning document, which makes it clear that potential impacts on neighbours, specifically including noise, should be taken into account. Just to be clear, that's from from scenario 6 on non-residential development at 2.3. Saying this is a business or an industrial area is relevant but isn't definitive because it doesn't give you a license for any amount of noise. You still have to consider the quantum and impact of noise. The business centre needs to open its windows for ventilation. Offices on that side are very much affected, and I really don't think it's reasonable to expect a building that's not equipped nor designed for air conditioning to keep its windows shut. We know what the summers are like. The proposal for attenuation depends on keeping those windows closed. There are competing views regarding the level of noise from Clover and Spectrum, but as the report from Environmental Health sets out, the guideline sound levels may be breached even when windows are open, and that's on the more conservative view. That's clearly a loss of amenity. We submit that that is loss of amenity, that the retrospective consent should be refused on that basis. If planning is granted, it should be subject to noise attenuation that means the neighbouring property does not have to keep its windows closed. We would say that the option of mitigation that the business centre have been given is either noise or heat in the summer, and that's not okay. And on that basis, we'd ask you to decline the permission. Happy to take any questions. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Pitt.
Oh,
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming to present this evening. As you mentioned that the business centre can't let out its units. Are you able to give, I don't know if you know, but do you have any more information on what that looks like in practice?
I went to go and see the business centre, was shown around the facility, including some of the units on that side of the building, which are next to the chillers. The noise is significant. You wouldn't work in a space like that. Just on a personal level, I'm a little bit neurodiverse. I wouldn't have been able to spend a day working in there. I don't think many people would have been able to. It's quite loud and quite penetrating, and it's consistent.
Thank you. Councillor Pitt, have you got a follow-up question?
Thank you. That's helpful. But specifically in terms of the loss of business, do you have any information on, is that just anecdotal, or do they have specifics that they've lost, regular hirers, for example? I'm not sure exactly how the business centre works, but if you've got any information on that, that would be really helpful.
No.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? No other questions, so thank you for joining us this evening. Our next speaker for this particular application is Tom Calvert and Rob Kirkleby. They will be sharing their 3 minutes, and they are objectors to the application. Welcome. And you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. If you press the middle button, and then your microphone will light up red.
Hello, my name's Rob Kirkleby. I am a principal consultant at Spectrum Acoustic Consultants, and I have 17 and a half years experience working as an acoustic consultant. With regards to the mechanical plant, it is just 4 meters from the facade of the offices, which is extremely close. It's also very large. It's approximately 12 meters long and has 20 fans running continuously 24/7. Whilst I was on site, I measured noise levels of 85 dB at the facade of the offices. And we've also carried out some calculations based on those measured noise levels. And we believe that the applicant's consultant has underestimated the noise levels from the equipment by as much as 12 dB, which is significant. A mitigation scheme has been proposed and it claims to achieve 21 dB attenuation. However, we have significant doubts as to whether this is actually achievable in practice. With regards to noise levels inside the offices, even with the windows open, we believe these would exceed the relevant criteria from a British standard for noise levels in offices. The offices require their windows to be open regularly for ventilation purposes. They do not have any other form of ventilation. They have no mechanical ventilation or even trickle vents. So the windows have to be open regularly. So even with the windows open, noise levels would be hugely significant inside. The proposals don't work acoustically, and we believe that planning permission should not be granted. I'm just going to pass over to Tom, who is the planning consultant here.
Good evening. It's Tom Kilbert from Brown & Co. So our client supports Hilton Foods neighbouring operations. The high levels of noise have blighted their business over the last 3 years. The council should not be conditioning a noise mitigation strategy when there are serious doubts between the parties over whether a solution is achievable. The scheme is indeed within established employment area, but it is contrary to policy LP18 as it is not compatible with an existing employment use. Our client's legal advice has also written to officers expressing strong concerns and highlighting the risk of a legal challenge with any approved scheme. This is because the noise mitigation scheme relies on our client's windows being constantly closed, contrary to national policy guidance, and a similar case was quashed at the High Court. Members are therefore strongly advised to seek advice from the council solicitor before determining this application. Our client understands that Hilton Foods is an important local employer and is supportive of a solution to be found, but the current scheme simply does not work. Thank you. We're available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification for these speakers? Councillor Brereton.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I can't remember your name from Spectrum. Rob. You say in your report that there's 104 dB output from the chilling unit, but at 1 metre away from the offices, it's 85. But that's rather a drop for 2 metres or whatever it is. I don't understand that. Could you clarify it, please?
Yeah, so when I refer to the 104 dB, that's the equipment sound power level. That's something you can't actually measure. That's something that has to be calculated, and it's a technical acoustic term that applies to various pieces of machinery. The 85 dB at 1 metre is a sound pressure level. That's a different parameter.
So it's a bit confusing giving 2 different bases for us to work on. So, you know, you've got 104 and then you've got 85, more or less next to each other. So if you're calculating, say, inside, which formula thing do you use?
So if you're calculating a noise level inside, you're always looking at sound pressure level. In this instance, we believe that the relevant noise limit should be 35 dB, which is set out in British Standard 8233 for offices. We calculate even with the mitigation in place, providing it achieves 21 dB like they're claiming, that would result in 51 dB inside with the windows open and 41 dB inside with the windows closed. So there's still a significant excess with the windows closed.
So, Councillor Brereton, you might want to ask those questions also to the planning officer when we come to clarifications for those as well. Are there any other questions? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming to speak to us. It's very helpful. So you questioned whether the 21 decibel attenuation is achievable. Can you give us some information to kind of back that up in terms of precedents and other sites? I know that there's a limit to how much you can cloak a device that needs to have air exchanges. So can you give us a bit more information on the specificity of that, why you question that as being achievable?
Yes, that the scheme is relying on essentially silencers underneath the unit, which is the input, and then you have silencers on the top, which is the discharge, and then they have a screen tightly fitted around the sides. You're relying on screening from the barrier, which is, you know, on paper can often be overestimated compared to reality. And also with the scheme, this equipment requires a lot of air to circulate around it. You're effectively completely enclosing it and really limiting the amount of air that can flow around. And actually in those situations, you can sometimes end up with the machine trying to overcompensate and working even harder. So it becomes even more noisy. And then the whole thing just starts to fall over because it can't work efficiently.
Are there any other questions or clarification? Councillor Muckball.
Thank you, Chair. It's not completely covered though, is it? Because it's the air can go up. It's not covered over, it's just around, isn't it?
So underneath it would have silencers, which are kind of like odds, which restrict the air from coming up to it. And then on the top, it has, they're like hats, silencers. And again, that's restricting the noise that can come out of the top. So it's not like it's an open bottom and top and the sides just covered. It's covered all the way around the side, underneath with the silencers and a series of silencers on the top as well. It's quite a significant scheme mitigation.
Thank you. Are there other questions of clarification for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for joining us this evening. Our next speaker for this application is the agent, Dominic Kramer. So thank you for joining us this evening. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and when you're ready, you can press the middle button and the microphone will light up red.
Good evening, Chair. Hilton Foods are a major local employer employing just under 1,000 people on the site, where they supply Tesco and other supermarkets with 2.75 million packs a week, supplying over 500 million meals to the UK consumers every year. Annually, they supply 41% of UK households from this Huntingdon site. Huntingdon initially rented this and the adjacent building to increase their warehouse capacity, but over time, this building came to be used for meat packing. The building is fully air conditioned to keep the building at a constant temperature throughout the year in line with food safety standards. Like many companies, these changes are often carried out by engineers unaware that planning permission might be required for changes that they're carrying out. In 2022, Hilton's new facilities manager audited their building stock and found irregularities in the approvals and approached us, MWK Architects, to ameliorate the situation, hence this application for respective change of use. An initial application was submitted on the 31st of May last year for change of use for this unit. At this stage, your environmental protection officer raised initial concerns about the noise generated from the plant, which had been in place for several years. Working with the officer, we explored a noise enclosure, how this could be constructed, and what noise level reduction could be achieved. As the months progressed, working with suppliers and noise consultants, we realized that a full height screen would give the best results. As this would significantly deviate from the screen proposed, we withdrew that application and immediately resubmitted a new scheme in December 2023 with this enhanced screen that repositions the fan units clear of the container and has the screens extended up to eaves height so the noise is deflected out above the buildings. We estimate that the cost of these works will be in the order of £200,000, and Hilton are keen to have these works completed during the cooler winter and spring months. We have considered the neighbours' concerns regarding the plant, which their lawyers have described as hugely significant and disruptive. Hilton have reached out to those neighbours and have, on top of the proposed £200,000 screening, offered to install triple glazed windows, sound insulation and air conditioning to their buildings free of charge, of all of which have been rejected by the Huntingdon Business Centre. The final point that I think is worth making is that the neighbouring building was a warehouse which has been converted into offices, for which we have been unable to find any record of the neighbours applying for planning permission for these changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification for this particular speaker? Councillor Brereton. Press the middle button.
Thank you, Chair. This acoustic panel, have you got a manufacturer's decibel absorption sort of figure? So.
Right. Yes, we've been working with the manufacturers, and your environmental protection officer has been involved in that discussion. So what we did is we came with an initial scheme that we looked at it and we weren't getting the sound levels that we wanted. So as we worked over the months with manufacturers, we've come up with better levels. The screens got bigger, and then we realized that we couldn't realistically, we need to make a fresh planning application. And so the consultants have been working with Claire Braybrook for best part of 9 months to come up with a solution that she, with her technical expertise and our noise consultants' expertise, felt was within the limits they wanted to work with. So yes, they're there, and Claire has access to all of that information.
Councillor Tevlin.
Thank you. We heard from the last speakers of the potential of the scheme to overload the chillers. I don't know, in your experience, whether Hilton Foods or any other similar have had a similar scheme where this might be a potential issue of overloading, and what you might do to mitigate this.
We actually changed the scheme between one and the other. So the first scheme that we put in, we left the chillers sitting directly on top of the containers. We realized that we wouldn't be able to get the airflow underneath the containers for the cooling that they've required. So the plan that the planning officer put up in front of you has a section drawing in front of it where the chillers have actually now been, they're now sitting on their own structure. The chillers have actually been lifted quite significantly, a good metre or more above the containers now on a new raised platform. And then that has increased the whole height of the structure around them. Hence why we felt that it was such a major change to allow that cooling and that repositioning to take place. And then the fact that the cladding would have to be much higher than it was previously. That's why we pulled the original application and put a fresh application before your planners. Does that help?
Do you know that will work in practice, that they won't get overloaded? from this?
We've looked at that, and although they say they run claim that they run 24/7, the main running of those chillers will be in the summer months. So we're talking about a 2-month period. Hilton at the moment keep all of those chillers cold. They cannot risk any of them falling over, as they put it. So those chillers at the moment are cooled, spray cooled with water. So the new housing will have that sprinkler system in place to keep those chiller units cool.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification for this particular speaker? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure of the technical process, but I'll ask this of officers later in a few moments. But in terms of the offers for mitigation that were turned down by the neighbouring property, are those still on the table? That could be, if it's possible to condition them, is that something that's still on the table from your point of view?
Yes. To be fair to your officers, the officers recommended that we reach out to the business park next door. All of those offers still on the table from Hilton to put triple glazing in, to air condition the building, and to put sound insulation into their building. The officers have rightly said that we can't really condition in an application to do something on another building, but all the way through, and as you mentioned in the report, it is on the table, and at all times Hilton have offered to improve the building.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions of clarification? There are no other questions, so thank you very much. We will now move on to questions of clarification for our planning officer and also any questions for our environmental health officer. Councillor Brereton.
Thank you. I'm busy tonight. Following on from my question before, the calculation of 51 decibels inside, is that fairly loud? I mean, we're laymen in regards of decibels. So if 51 decibels, what would that relate to that we could understand? Thank you.
So on the HSE website, they do have, because I thought you might ask some questions about sound levels today, and they've got a quiet office as between 40 and 50 and conversation between 50 and 60. That's the sort of level of decibels you're looking at. With regards to this, though, I don't think we would be wanting it to be 51 decibels internally, and from the applicant's noise consultant and from some of our calculations, we don't think it will be at 51, we think it will be below that. The British standard BS 8233 gives guideline values for offices. For an executive office, it's between 35 and 40. To give you an idea of 35, that's the sort of level that we would expect for someone in their residential living room to be resting. So it's quite a low level, 35 decibels. So 35 to 40 would be for an executive office, and then 35 to 45 would be for a sort of normal office meeting room, sort of those sorts of sound levels.
Thank you. So just to clarify for everybody, 51 decibels is an ordinary spoken conversation?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. Well, I know enough about acoustics to know that it's quite confusing for lay people to get their heads around, but I'll do my best. Actually, aside from that, so the question was raised about the use of the neighbouring building, and it was suggested by one of our speakers that it doesn't actually have planning permission for office use and its warehouse use. Should that have a bearing on our deliberations?
For you, Chair. So in terms of that, I think the main thing we've got to consider is the existing use there. we as officers don't have anything to the contrary to suggest that that is an unlawful use. As Huntingdon Business Centre, I'm pretty sure they said have been there for quite a few years themselves, but officers aren't challenging that use. So I think it's, yeah, we note the concerns raised by the applicant, but we're looking at the existing situation right now on those users. But I think it's just worth noting that in the industrial park, the original plan permission for the whole park included office use in there. So the fact that whether that office use is lawful or not, I don't think is a question here. It's to note that B1, which is office, B2 industry, B8, which is warehouse, all were granted on that park.
Councillor Pitt, do you have another question?
Thank you. We'll get on to acoustics now. So the report says that once mitigated are likely to be acceptable. So this is the 21 decibel attenuation. I'm trying to understand how what that would look like. So effectively, if we approve it with that condition of this attenuation being put in place and it's unable to achieve the 21 decibels of attenuation, would it therefore require further works to reduce the sound levels further, or what would be the process? Because I guess, you know, when applications are done retrospectively, there's a bit of a gamble by the people who build things and then ask for permission. And there's even more so when we're looking at attenuation that are likely to be, but will it become a condition that must be met, or is it based on the design?
So again, through you, Chair. So in terms of this, yes, the condition has been put forward. If they can't comply with that condition, then that's an enforcement issue. Or the alternative is that we may end up refusing a discharge conditions application because it doesn't meet what we consider to be acceptable noise levels. The applicant could go to appeal on that. Or the third option is they engage with us to look for an alternative solution. So I think it's been very clear that the terms of the conditions must be met. Otherwise, then we have to then deal with that. But we can't obviously preempt that. We have to give them the opportunity. And the opportunity comes from the fact that Environmental Health have advised that it is likely that they can meet that. So that's what's kind of on the table here tonight. But to be clear, there is a final check to be done. It's not they go away tonight, they get plan permission by committee, and then we leave them alone. They'll have to come back to us and confirm they have met those acceptable noise levels.
Just one more, and then we'll move on to Councillor.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So just to be absolutely clear in my mind, so the condition would be about the level of attenuation rather than the design of the attenuation equipment. And it's the 21 decibels, is that the specific, or what is the internal volume? What's the thing that's being conditioned?
I think the condition would be along the lines of ensuring that they've met what they've said they're going to achieve. So we'd be looking at putting what sort of the internal levels will be. So we would want an acceptable level internally for the adjacent building. And we would need evidence from them to demonstrate that they've complied with that. And then we would be able to do our own checks as well, because they may not have access to that building. So a lot of that may be calculations from them, but we can always double check that if we are allowed access to that building.
Just for you, Chair, to add to that. So in terms of the conditions, so that will be done in association with Environmental Health, but also our planning and enforcement team. So we will make sure as previous applications that have come before committee where there's been noise issues, it's not a straightforward process on getting those conditions right, because we have to make sure it's a technical side for Environmental Health. We also have to make sure that we've got enough in there that we can enforce against it, but they still have to meet the 6 tests set out. So it has to be reasonable, it has to be enforceable, precise. So it will be done in association with Environmental Health and Planning Enforcement.
Thank you. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. So right at the very beginning, we heard from Lewis saying that with the windows closed, and I just want to make sure I've got this correct now. So with the windows closed, if it was deemed sufficient and okay for anybody to work in that environment, and I'm not going to confuse everybody by talk about numbers because I think we can, but the level at the time with the windows closed, it's deemed sufficient. People can work in. I guess the first question I've got would be, We obviously we have to talk about numbers, but then rather than it being a peak, about a prolonged period of time working within that, so does that change the levels? Does it, the parameters that we're looking at? If we're having a short burst of noise is one thing, but sitting in that same noise for 8 hours whilst you're at work, is there, does that suddenly get us into a different way of looking at it? That'd be my first question.
No, so it would be over the sort of course of a working day. As I say, the levels for an executive officer are about 35 to 40. For a general office, you're looking at 35 to 45. So that's, I think the fan noise is fairly constant. So it's not like it's intermittent, so it hasn't got any characteristics that would, draw your attention to it in that respect. So intermittency and if it's quite tonal, that can be intrusive, but it hasn't got those characteristics according to the acousticians.
Thank you, and if I may. So that sort of clarifies that. Thank you. That's with the windows shut. I don't think it's not unreasonable for especially when it's warm. Somebody wants to open a window, that's going to change that dramatically, isn't it? If they don't shut, and if they don't open the windows, something we haven't talked about is temperature. Working temperature, and if it's we have to look at the parameters that we've got there at the moment, and there isn't any air conditioning. What's the working? Do you have that information? I'm sorry to put it on the spot because you're coming to talk about noise, but if we can't open a window, then we could potentially be thinking about something different, couldn't we?
No, I don't know what the sort of maximum temperature levels are for offices. When we were looking at this, obviously we were looking at the number of windows that were impacted, the facade that those are on, if there are any other windows that can be used as ventilation. It's just that northern facade that is going to be impacted with regard to the noise from this site. So we're looking at levels that will meet the lower sort of criteria with windows closed, we believe, and from the information that we've received, we think that there might be a slight breach of those upper levels when they've got the windows open. So it's balancing out whether that's acceptable. We concluded that it was from our remit.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Gorser.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at this, and noise is the big concern here. I went today and at the Southern Point with just a cell phone app recorded 70 dB. Now the NEA, National Environment Agency, do have some sort of boundary limits from factory premises. For a commercial site, it's 70 during the day, 65 for the evening, and 60 at night at the boundary of their property. So because I think I read in here that there wasn't, it's mainly talking about residential, impact on residential, but this does seem to say that boundary noise impacting on factory premises or by limits for factory premises, and it impacts on commercial premises, and those are the levels that are set. So these are the levels that they're talking of, and so are we actually setting a figure that they've got to achieve when we condition this? Because I'm like some of the others, Councillor Pitt and some of the others, that I'm nervous that if we approve without some sort of definitive idea of what we think it should be, then there's concern because it will just be, oh well, that's not it. But the NEA do seem to have definitive figures at the curtilage.
With regard to the condition, we would certainly be looking for setting a level, and we would want, as we've spoken about, we would want that to be really robust to ensure that that can be achieved. And if they would need to demonstrate that they can achieve that that level. So we'd be looking at the sort of the lower range internally. Now that would be with windows closed, but currently we considered that was appropriate. If there's a feeling that needs to be with a level with windows open as well, then we can potentially look at what sort of levels those would be and include that with any condition if councillors felt that was appropriate.
I'm just bringing our planning officer.
So just to add to that, so in terms of condition, it would have to be precise. So we'd have to make sure we put measurements in there. Otherwise the applicant doesn't know what they're trying to achieve. So, and it's in that case of that where it can't be achieved, we need to be able to then defend our position at appeal if we refuse to discharge that condition. So yeah, so in terms of meeting the tests, it would have to be precise.
Councillor Jordan, sorry.
Yes, obviously it's all about the noise. And I mean, I'm just slightly confused as well about levels. It's not my expertise. But I mean, 7.8, it says the council environmental health officer has visited the site and considers that this is an unusual case, as it's usual to consider noise impact on residential amenities, whereas in this case, it's to consider the impact on offices. But unfortunately, if you flip it on the other side, presumably the business park who employ people have a duty of care, which is why the noise level is coming up to the people that use it. I am a little bit concerned about the noise levels and numbers that have been, and you use words like robust and there's words like reasonable noise. What does that mean? It's too vague for me, too vague. And I'm listening to the arguments around the table and the questions that are being asked, and I just do not feel that I'm getting a concise answer as to these levels. And surely it's not unreasonable for people to be able to have their windows open, whether you're living in a house or whether you're living in an office, working in an office. That impact should not impact on your workability, surely. And as I say, there's words used in here like robust and reasonable. What is that? What does that actually mean?
So with regard to the noise condition, we would be looking at the level of 35 to 40 inside, which is the level for an executive office. So that's what we would be looking for them to achieve, the lower end of that, which they have demonstrated or they've stated within their report that they can achieve. So I don't think that is an unreasonable condition to put on them with regard to internal sound levels. The reasonableness of having your window open, I think we always think obviously residential properties, when you're living in your own home, you shouldn't have the impact of any noise when you've got your windows open. With regard to your working environment, obviously you're not resting, so you are there to work, and our sort of conclusions with regard to this site, like I say, we weighed up a number of factors and we've discussed this within our team, and we felt that the sort of slight increase in levels potentially over the guideline levels with the windows open would be classed as acceptable, because we didn't feel that it would be a significant adverse impact from the information that we had.
Thank you. I'll just bring in legal services.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. I just wanted to sort of intervene because of the points that the representative made about a potential legal challenge, and also it's not an easy area for members to get their head around. It's highly complex. So my advice is going to be on what you have to consider. This is weighed up also against the fact that if members refused the application, there will be an appeal. So consequently, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You could get a potential JR from the objectors, or you could get an appeal if it's refused. So in terms of the challenge, there was reference to the council failing to have regard to the planning practice guidance, and the objectors had referred to significant observed adverse effect levels, which is talked about in the planning practice guidance. Obviously, you've heard expert evidence from our own officer that significant observed adverse effect level is not reached. Section 7.24 of the report discusses at some length about windows being opened and closed. It refers to the British Standard guidance, appears to be given more weighting for residential premises, as did the case law that was quoted by the objectors in their letter. That was a Cemex case, and that concerned residential. It doesn't say in the planning practice guidance that the guidance only applies to residential and not commercial. But I think just in terms of trying to assure members that the officer report is comprehensive, and ultimately members have got to take into account professional advice from their officers. In this case, obviously the objectors have got their own expert evidence, but you have to make a decision. We would obviously say, if our officers find it acceptable, you should really be taking their advice. In terms of a legal challenge on judicial review, High Court challenge, they can be made on grounds such as where the council's acted unreasonably, and obviously acting unreasonably would be ignoring any objection, ignoring any expert evidence to the contrary. But I think members are giving this a good airing, so I would actually be quite confident that that ground wouldn't be satisfied. And also, if there's been an error in law, and as I've said, the report touches and deals with weighing up local policy and national policy. So I feel that all the information is there, albeit that you have to take the environmental health officer's advice as regards to decibel levels and all of this technical terminology. I can't obviously help with that regard, but it's just really to say to members, if you have concerns, just the very fact that someone's objecting and threatening a legal challenge should not be, of primary concern to members. It's just a sort of assurance that we're making as officers to you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanderson, did you still have a question of clarification?
Yeah, just before we go back into debate, Chair, I think it might be useful, this may be a monumental task, I hope it's not, just to summarise what the mitigation process will be, how that will work in reality. I think that would be useful just before we come back to the decision making. Thank you.
As in what they've proposed for the mitigation. Yeah, so obviously the units, they're going to be lifting those up, putting attenuators underneath and on top, and screening all of the way round. Now, they've modelled, and obviously there is some, it's very difficult to model, it's complex site, this, because of the proximity and the noise levels involved. But we are satisfied that those internal levels can be met. And as I say, we will be looking at putting a condition on there so that they need to demonstrate that that has been complied with. If it isn't, then we will be expecting them to do further works to ensure that that does comply with those.
Okay, are there any other questions, clarification before we move? Councillor Pitt, and then we'll move on.
Sorry, yet another one for me. So just to sort of test the scenario before we go into debate. So if members were minded to request a condition for a certain background noise level while the windows are open, is that something that would be acceptable in terms of a process? Yeah, I guess if they're talking about sort of around 40 decibels with windows closed and 50 decibels with them open, if members thought that actually it would be reasonable for the neighbouring building to be able to have their windows open and still have a reasonably low level of sound, background noise, I'm just trying to understand whether that's enforceable. There's quite a lot of questions built into that one.
So through you, Chair, so I think the difficulty here is that we have to obviously take into account the applicant's acoustic information and whether they said they can achieve those levels. If we set levels that are too low, do you know what I mean? So lower levels, and that's unreasonable, then we could end up in a situation where we're imposing a condition that they can't achieve. So then that would automatically put us in a potential place of them having to appeal that condition or come straight back to us with a Section 73. So I think in terms of why we've just got the headlines for conditions, it's because we need to go away and obviously interrogate that information, but also discuss it with our planning enforcement team to make sure that those conditions are reasonable and precise enough. I'm just mindful that we might, if members wish to see lower levels, I would probably look to defer the item than to say to impose that condition here at committee, because then that will give officers the opportunity to go away and see whether that is achievable as a condition. I just don't think we can give you that answer right here, right now, without putting the applicant in a position where they may not be able to achieve it. So that would be my advice, that if members are going down that route, it would be a deferral for that sole reason, for officers to go away and scrutinise what the levels could be in a condition, and then we could come back and report that. But I don't think we could do that at committee right now.
Okay, Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair, and forgive me on this one, because I'm asked as a complete layman now, so just trying to make this as simple as we can. So based on what we've just heard, so the applicant has suggested where they can get to, what they're hoping to achieve. If that benchmark, is that benchmark acceptable? And I completely get where you're going to, sort of say how low we can, you can push this. I think from a practical point of view, from where we are in the meeting at the moment, and what's in front of us. So the applicants, where they can get to, is that acceptable from an environmental health perspective? Sorry, I was just saying. So based on what we've just heard, and also obviously my colleagues, looking to test this to get it to as low as possible, which is obviously the right thing to do. But just to help out here a little bit with based on what we just heard, with the applicant, they're suggesting the work that they've looked at this and they think they can get it down to A level. Now that level, is that level acceptable within your sort of realm, if you like?
So just why Claire's looking it up, I think in terms of where officers are recommend this condition, what the applicant has put forward, environmental health and both the planning officers are happy that they can reach that. I think the point that was being made is that if members wanted to go further than what we've got in the report and what the applicant said, that's where I would recommend the deferral at that point, because that would be going beyond what the applicant said they could achieve, and then whether it's reasonable as a local planning authority to impose that into a condition. So I think there's just a clear difference there, but I'll let Claire come back on those, that if it's in line with what we've seen, then yes. If you want to go further than that, then I'd recommend a deferral. But I'll let Claire just come back on these.
Okay, so in the applicant's noise impact assessment, their internal noise predictions are 35 internally with closed windows and 45 with an open window. That's what they're predicting with the information that they have. Yeah.
Okay, so we will now move on to our discussion. So who would like to start the discussion? Thank you, Councillor Gorson.
Thank you, Chair. Having visited the site, yes, noise is the key problem, and looking at how it's been affected, obviously the noise will have been looked at the closest proximity, about 4 meters apart, but the plant actually does move away a little bit. So that will be, the noise levels will differ as you go along the plant, is my understanding, or is my belief, and so on. I do think that there's the possibility of, or there has been the possibility of loss of earnings for the Huntingdon Business Centre, and do have empathy for how they're going about it. But at the same time, I feel that the applicant is trying to comply with this and to try and work with along very stringent lines that we need to put in. So my view would be that so long as we can get the figures that our own environment health are happy with, in conjunction with what the applicant has put in, we need to sort of go along those lines and sort of work with to try and deliver this, so long as at the same time, if they don't deliver the reductions, we do impact on it very quickly, because it is then adverse for the neighbouring property financially. So at this point, I'll listen to everybody else, but my view would be to advise approval at this stage.
Thank you very much, Councillor Coulson. Councillor Corney, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Again, this quite a complicated one, which is obviously why it's come to us, isn't it? You know, this is a and I'll be honest with you, I've really sort of, even from reading this at home to coming out, I've gone one way to the other. Right? So I'm really undecided on this. I do take a little bit of I don't know the word now, but I'm a bit happier having, you know, I think we've asked a lot of questions, and I think I feel, you know, sort of had some good sound advice, I think, this evening, which I think is really helpful. I know we didn't ask this on the, I know it's brought up, but just for clarification, I know that, you know, we can't condition on the other building, which is, you know, and I think the offer that's been there, I think I'd grab that with both hands, but that's not for us to sort of say that, or it can't be a condition, but and I feel that every effort's being made there. I think we've got to trust our officers on this, and the environmental health side of it, you know, as well. I think, you know, sort of proceed with this, and then, you know, back our enforcement officers and the environmental officers as well to get this right. But so at the moment, I'm leaning towards approval, but again, I'm not going to make a suggestion yet. I'll wait to hear everybody else's comments.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Corney, I'm really leaning towards approval here. It's been quite an interesting debate, actually, and I never realised acoustics and decibel levels were so interesting. But thank you for explaining it to us all. I think the input from Claire's been very helpful as well, and thank you, Lewis, as well, for the work you're doing here. It's just monitoring this is going to be key for me, and I'm sure that the applicants here may find themselves in a situation where perhaps there's some difficulty with what they're trying to achieve, and that's understandable perhaps at times, but I think it gives me some comfort that this will be monitored carefully. It's obviously quite a high profile application because it's come to this committee, which is, I think, in many ways a good thing. So I'm probably still a little bit open-minded on this, but I'm less concerned perhaps than I was before we started this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mockball.
Gosh, this is a really hard one for me. I was, more leaning towards deferral just because I wanted to see whether we could achieve those lower levels, because I'm just really concerned with, you spend 8 hours in an office, and that's a really large chunk of your time. And I'm just thinking about, mental health and all that stuff. And I just feel like if it's possible to achieve a lower level with the windows open, I would be happier to see, if we can extend that time, defer it, and just make sure we can secure that. Otherwise, we go back to the previous. But I don't see a harm in deferring at this point if, our planning officer has said that is something that he would recommend if we were trying to get that lower level with the windows open. Because this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about, windows closed. We're talking about the summer months where the windows are open. And that's what's going to affect the people using the offices. But once again, I'm happy to listen to the rest of the debate.
Councillor Brereton.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the problems that Hilton Foods have. I've worked with chillers in the past, so I do understand a bit about them. Not an easy job to silence them. A bit disappointed with the business centre for not accepting or even half accepting the offer from them. Disappointing, really. I was there yesterday. I went up on the fire escape next to the offices. If somebody had been with me, we could have had a conversation. There is obviously noise coming off the chillers, but it isn't that loud. 51 decibels with the open windows, according to the Royal National Institute for Deaf. 60 decibels is an ordinary spoken conversation, and 40 decibels is a quiet library, and 30 decibels is a whisper. So if we're at 35, that's pretty quiet. And with the windows open, 51 be somewhere between an ordinary conversation and a quiet library. So I don't think that's too bad. I'm minded to go along with the officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brereton. Councillor Pitt.
So I did study acoustics 30, I don't know how long ago, a long time ago. And that's what leads me to not trust my own knowledge about it. It is really confusing. So making comparisons between spoken words and an industrial fan is really hard to kind of get a sense of that. And actually being there is really helpful. So thanks for doing that. But for me, so there's so many numbers being mentioned, I've got a bit lost in it myself. But if the applicant, effectively, if we're saying the applicant is promising to deliver 35 decibels with the windows closed and 45 with them open, I mean, the site is fairly close to a significant road. And I can't imagine the background noise from the road is very different to those sort of levels. I think that in the same way that building and then applying for retrospective planning is a gamble, I think to promise something that may be very difficult to achieve is also a gamble. But if the applicant is willing to make that promise and will have to live up to that, then I think that is probably the way, that would receive my support. I think, yeah, if those are the key figures, the 35 closed and 45 decibels open, that feels like an acceptable level that we can get to. So I'm happy to propose as presented. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that, Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think we've got enough information here to make a decision. I'm not a great one for deferrals. Obviously, the applicant is going to go to a fair expense to do all the alterations on these units anyway. So it doesn't seem quite right to make them go through all that and then not quite get it right. I think we've got to rely on their information. 45 is very, very low. I mean, a bedroom, they say, is 40. So it's an industrial area. There is going to be noise. There's going to be traffic noise. There's going to be lots of other noises going on at the same time. And I look at what they do. I mean, obviously they're quite a progressive company, high employers as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of people work there, which obviously rely on getting this right, and I'm sure they will, because if that's at risk, then it's probably not in their best interest. So. Yeah, I'm quite happy with what they're proposing and what they can achieve, and we've got our own officers that will monitor this anyway. So, yeah, I'm happy to go for approval on this one, Chairman.
Councillor Butler, are you seconding that or are you? Yeah. Thank you. We'll just bring in our planning officer.
I just want to check the proposal and seconder that you're happy that officers deal with the wording of the conditions, that you would delegate that power to us.
And just to be clear that the conditions would cover open windows and closed windows as well. Everyone's in agreement? Yep, okay.
Is there anyone else that wants to contribute? Councillor Jordan.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for all your advice and making things clear. I was actually going the other way because I was very concerned, like fellow councillors, about people who work in offices for 8 hours and are exposed to noise. But I went, you know, it is an industrial area. As you rightly say, there's a significant road going there. And I think taking all those factors and hearing about the levels, I agree, enforcement and monitoring of this is going to be a key. I think it's been a very difficult one. I think it's been a very good debate. I'd like to thank officers for their input on this. And I think I will be posting it as well, approving it. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? In that case, we will move to a vote. We've had Councillor Pitt propose approval for this particular application. Councillor Butler has seconded this approval. So all those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Anyone against or any abstentions? Therefore, that has been approved. We will move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the appeal decisions, and we'll have that reported by our planning service manager.
Thank you, Chair. We have only 3 appeals to update on tonight. One was a tree appeal, and that was actually withdrawn. The second one on your list is a householder application in St Ives, and the inspector agreed with officers, and that was dismissed. That was refused. And the third one was refused. We were concerned about the impact on the amenity and privacy of the neighbour next door. However, the inspector disagreed with the judgment and allowed that appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say thank you to all the officers for their hard work, and thank you for all the contributions this evening. And that will end our meeting. Thank you.